Good evening. Thanks to everyone for sparing your time to listen to this webinar. A special thanks to Dr. Ramakrishnan, the president of IMA, who is always there during every webinar to encourage us, and Dr. Palani, the president-elect of IMA, Dr. Maragadamani ma'am, Dr. C.V. Nadarajan sir, Dr. Shanta ma'am, and other office bearers of this IMA South. Thank you so much for giving me this platform for me to discuss about the history of diabetes. So for those who are attending this webinar for the first time, I want to tell you that this is the fourth in the series. First webinar was covering between Ebers papyrus, starting from the Ebers papyrus, which was found in the pyramids of Egypt, to the zeroing in on to the pancreas as the seat of diabetes. So that took almost 3,500 years. And then the next 30 years, a lot of researchers were doing research about the development of the secretion from the pancreas. They were trying to isolate the secretion. So even before Banting and Best, there were at least 20 serious researchers doing experiments, and at least 6 of them have succeeded in isolating the extract. But unfortunately, they couldn't get the benefit of the latest biochemical estimation of blood glucose, which was available during Banting and Best time. And they misjudged that the hypoglycemic reactions of the animals as adverse reactions. So they got really worried. They felt they couldn't just move on to the human experiment. And they did not realize that their extract were in fact working fine, just they are causing hypoglycemia. So that was a problem for them. And then the third webinar was about the actual insulin discovery. So within 11 months, these 4, Banting, Best, Mcleod, and Polyp, they came together to discover insulin. Today, in this webinar, we are going to just document each of these 4 persons' complete life with all its strengths and weaknesses. Since none of them are alive, it is easy for us to discuss about their life. Otherwise, it is not proper to discuss about somebody's personal life. But what we need to understand is every scientist, even though they are known for their work for the outside world through their discoveries, but they have a family life behind. And whether the family is supportive enough for them to achieve laurels and heights in their chosen field is a moot question to answer. Within these 4 people, you can see so many disparities when it comes to their personal as well as social life. So it is all about their personal life and how, after getting insulin on board to treat millions of diabetic people, how their lives got torn apart because of their personal ambitions and greediness. So this is Dr. Mcleod. Actually, he was appointed as the HOD of Physiology Department at Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio, at 27 years of age. So there he worked between 1903 to 1918. During those 15 years of service there, he was considered as authority of carbohydrate metabolism. And he published this book, which you can see on the right-hand side, Diabetes, Its Pathological Physiology, which was a 1,000-page book, which contained everything they knew about diabetes as well as the pancreas around that. So he was an authority. And he was working in Case Western Reserve University. At that same time, University of Toronto was modeled on Johns Hopkins, Baltimore. So the Canadians wanted this university to become a model university. They wanted to make this into a research facility, a great hospital, and an outstanding medical school in the world. So naturally, they have to invite top people to do this. So J.J.R. Mcleod was lured from Case Western University, Cleveland, by University of Toronto. Already he had achieved international recognition as an authority on carbohydrate metabolism, and his 1915 paper, Rapid and Accurate Clinical Method for Estimation of Sugar in Small Quantities of Blood, was a landmark paper where he discussed the new developments in the biochemical area, wherein very small quantities of blood is only required to do the blood glucose estimation. Prior to this introduction of calorimetric method, they had to draw about 20 to 30 ml of blood. And imagine in small animals, if you are going to draw 20, 30 ml of blood every hour, the animal will die just because you are drawing too much of blood. So this paper published by Mcleod in 1915 was a landmark one, because we are going to see how this idea of using calorimeter in the experiments done by Banting was going to be the game changer later on. So in University of Toronto, Mcleod was there between 1918 to 1928. So he was a HOD of Physiology, University of Toronto. He joined in 1918. His main interest was on carbohydrate metabolism. Already he had 37 papers on the subject and 12 papers on experimental glycosuria, and he had written 11 books by the time he moved over to University of Toronto. He had 6 honorary doctorates, was a member of Royal Society of London. He had fellowships from 2 Royal Colleges. He was the president of American Physiological Society between 1921 to 1923. Exactly when they discovered insulin, he became the president of American Physiological Society. So that was one more reason why their paper was taken into consideration for presentation. And at 42 years of age, 18 years of research experience, and he was an authority. And this is the University of Toronto Physiology Department. You can see the nice building. And this introduction of calorimeter into the biochemical department by Mcleod was a game changer. Actually, he brought in the calorimeter and trained his students. So some of his biochemistry students, like Best, got trained in using this calorimeter when they finished their BA biochemistry. When Banting approached Mcleod, obviously Mcleod assigned Best to assist Banting. He knew that Banting knew nothing about measuring blood glucose with a calorimeter. So he assigned one of his best students, Best, for the job. And what happened to Mcleod after insulin discovery? Because we have covered a lot about these 4 people prior to insulin discovery and during insulin discovery. We'll just move on. So after insulin got discovered, all the 4 quarreled. They were after their fame individually. And Mcleod, being a reserved man, he did not get into argument with Banting. Just he moved to this biological station for some time. He started this biological station in St. Andrews in Canada, and he positioned some of his BA students there so that they can do research there, because he was interested in doing research on fish, because they believed, because cattle stock is not sufficient to provide insulin for the mankind. So since fish is very much abundant in the ocean, he believed isolating insulin from fish will be a good idea to provide continuous supply of insulin to the world. So the research took place in this biological station by students of Dr. Mcleod. And you can see on the far right, Clark Noble within that red circle. Clark Noble was the one who lost the toss with Best when they tossed the coin to see who is going to assist Banting first. So he was one of the best friends of Charles Best. So he continued to work under Mcleod in the biological station doing fish experiments. And here you can see Mcleod standing on the wharf, and one of the other student, McCormick, you can see him cutting fish. So they developed interest in the fish because fish had large islets. So it's very easy to dissect the islets from the fish easily. So that's why they started this experiment. But somehow it didn't come the way Mcleod wanted. So around 18 months, he was there doing research in this biological station. Then what happened? Banting became very, very famous, and he started ridiculing Mcleod. He started talking ill about Mcleod to the press. So Mcleod, being a very highly acclaimed professor, with so many research behind his belt. So he did not want to continue. So Michael Bliss, the author of Insulin History book, he is telling Banting's only success at the university in these post-insulin years was in continuing to blacken the reputation of J.J.R. Mcleod, his professor. So Mcleod got eclipsed continuously by Banting in Toronto. Naturally, he moved to University of Aberdeen in 1928. He was originally from Scotland, so he moved to one of the biggest universities in Scotland, University of Aberdeen, and where he directed a lot of research and a lot of PhD students worked under him, and till his retirement he was there. He died in 1935 with a lot of pain due to crippling arthritis. So he had a very sad death. A degree of justice was achieved when the main auditorium in the Medical Sciences building in Toronto was named after him after many, many decades. So this is a Mcleod auditorium. You can see there in the University of Toronto campus, Medical Science building. On the 75th anniversary of insulin, that was in 1976, the medical auditorium was named J.J.R. Mcleod Auditorium. And you can see in this map on the top left corner, you can see the auditorium in the map. And on the right side, you can see the Toronto General Hospital as well as Toronto Hospital for Sick Children, where Leonard Thompson received the first insulin shot. So now we'll move over to the second of the quartet, James Petran Polyp. He was an alumnus of the same University of Toronto, Biochemistry Department. He did his BA in 1912, MA in 1913, finished PhD in 1916 with the same university. Then when he was doing PhD, he was called by University of Alberta, Edmonton, to become assistant professor in 1915. He was doing a lot of research, and every summer holidays, he used to go to Chicago, Glasgow, Sheffield, and he worked under all great people to learn the art. At 27 years of age, he was an associate professor of biochemistry at the University of Alberta, and he had published 24 original research papers by the time he came to University of Toronto on a traveling Rockefeller Fellowship to work under Professor Mcleod. So when he came, insulin research was progressing nicely. At some point, Polyp's help was required to purify insulin. He was one of the best biochemists available in those times. So it was said that he worked day and night for about a week. When the first shot in Leonard Thompson failed to produce any appreciable effect, he, without sleep, getting a wink of sleep, he worked for 7 days to purify insulin and then successfully injected into Leonard Thompson. So Polyp, coming to his life, his father was a florist, James Dennis Polyp, and you can see his mother, Mahala. So he received his PhD from University of Toronto in 1916, and then he married in December 1915. For Polyp's credit, in July 1925, he wrote a letter to Banting expressing regret, because we know that during the insulin purification times, they had a lot of fights, and even Banting had a personal fight with Polyp, since Polyp was not revealing the formula of purification to him. So Polyp finally expressed his regret by this letter, where he writes, "I personally regret very much the unfortunate misunderstandings of the hectic winter of 1922. So from that point onwards, slowly both of them became friends. So Banting and Polyp became close friends for life. Polyp was a very gentle, sensitive, humble, kind person who never got embroiled in any controversy. So even this insulin controversy, he put that behind by writing this letter and became friends with Banting. Polyp at one point said that truth was to be found in the scientific publications and might emerge after we are all dead. Whenever the press asked him whether your purification was an important step in insulin's discovery, whether you deserve Nobel Prize along with Mcleod and Banting, he always said That you will find the truth in the publications. I'm not going to tell anything about it. And Banting at some point said, myself and Best wouldn't have achieved a damn thing without Polyp. So later on, he realized this. And Polyp, again, I want to quote Polyp, the part which I was able to contribute to the work of the team was only that which any well-trained biochemist could be expected to contribute, and was indeed very trivial by comparison with Banting's contribution. He was very magnanimous here. Later on, all the researchers who studied the experiments, the papers very closely, have identified Polyp's purification method, which was the final leg in that insulin experiment, was very crucial for the human success. So without Polyp, they wouldn't have achieved this, but Polyp was very magnanimous in attributing every glory to Banting. Then Polyp dabbled with insulin for some time. Then Mcleod wanted him to do some serious research. Actually, he advised him to go into endocrine research. In fact, Polyp did a lot of experiments with vegetable insulins. He was trying to identify an extract from vegetables to produce the blood glucose. He even made glucokinin, the plant extract. And here he wrote to the editor of the Nature, claiming priority, because there were some other group doing the same experiment. So he did not want the controversy like insulin to erupt here. So he wrote a letter here. But then glucokinin did not progress much. So these were the papers about glucokinin by Polyp. And on the right, you can see the book written by Polyp, Hormones in Relation to Human Behavior, one of the landmark publications in endocrinology around that time. So then he moved on to serious research. Now we are going to have some interlude in this presentation. We are going to look into an interesting thing here, the discovery of Inca alkaloids. Why I am including the discovery of Inca alkaloids into this insulin webinar, we will shortly see. You can see in the picture Clark and Best, Clark, Noble and Best. Noble and Best were close friends. They were doing BA biochemistry, and when their exams got over during their summer vacation, Mcleod called them to assist in planting. So they tossed a coin, which Best won, and Noble accepted that he will come after a month. After a month, he came. But then by the time when Noble came, the experiment was progressing very nicely, and Best has learned so much. So it is difficult for Noble to catch up from there. So all the three of them, Noble, Best, and Banting, agreed within themselves that it is in the best interest of the research, Best to continue rather than Noble to join in there. So very magnanimous of Clark Noble to do that, because he just let the chance go away in the best interest of science progressing. Later, another time, another opportunity came to gain glory, but unfortunately he let it pass through the fingers because it was in an envelope. This glory was in the form of an envelope. There are a lot of background noises. Can you mute everyone?
I muted everybody actually in the beginning itself. Now I'll mute again.
Thank you.
Lala, I'll mute again. You only unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. I'll mute everybody. You unmute yourself later. Can you hear me, sir?
One more. Yeah, I can unmute. You can mute him. Okay, thank you. Right.
Yes, sir. You can start.
Yeah, right. So Clark Noble received an envelope from Madagascar, actually from Jamaica, in fact, which the envelope contained Madagascar periwinkle leaves. So the leaves of this plant. Somebody from Jamaica sent this huge envelope with some of the leaves. In that envelope, they mentioned that these leaves were used as an anti-diabetic in Jamaica by the older generation. The writer of that letter wanted Noble, who was working in the diabetes department of University of Toronto, to find out whether it has got any anti-diabetic properties. This envelope was received by Clark Noble in 1952. He was working in the physiology department. So, Robert Noble, before going into that story again, we need to know about Robert Noble. Robert Noble was the brother of the Noble who lost the toss, younger brother, 10 years younger to him. He also was a student of Mcleod, who did BA biochemistry, MA biochemistry, and then PhD. So he did PhD in biochemistry. And Mcleod pushed him towards endocrine research. And Mcleod referred this Robert Noble, the younger brother of the senior Noble, to Polyp's laboratory to work under him. So that is how Robert Noble went and joined the Polyp's laboratory. Polyp's team at that time was experimenting with a lot of traditional herbs to find oral remedies for diabetes. By the time, a lot of numbers of type 2 diabetes were there. So injecting all patients with diabetes was a tremendous task. So they were trying to find out whether oral drugs can be developed. So they were trying a lot of herbal remedies in Polyp's laboratory, where Robert Noble joined as a researcher. And Robert Noble received this envelope from his elder brother from Toronto. So he prepared the plant extract from these leaves and then administered that to diabetic rats through the oral route. It failed for the first time. When it was given oral route, it failed. The extract injection produced abscesses in the liver and kidneys of rats, a sign of bacterial infection. So they were really stunned to see the infections in the liver and kidneys of the rats after getting the extract. Since the extract is sterile, it must have dampened the immune system. That was the inference from this. Because why this extract should produce abscesses in the rats? So probably it is suppressing the immune system. And around that time, in the same laboratory, Helena Robinson was measuring blood sugar. Actually, she was a Holocaust survivor from Poland. She escaped from the Nazis from Poland camps. And she joined Karolinska Institute as a scientist, where she learned the new technique of counting the white cells that was getting introduced for the first time. If you get a blood sample, you can count the white cell count. That was the first time when Karolinska Institute was doing that. So she documented the plummeting of WBCs after injection of the extract. So while the senior researcher Noble just asked Helena Robinson to measure the blood sugar, which was her job, she was also parallelly measuring the number of WBCs before and after giving the extract. Then she found out that the WBC numbers came down after giving the extract, which she discussed with Noble. Then Noble realized that the extract was suppressing the bone marrow and decided to try it in cancers with overproliferation of WBCs. That is how Vinca alkaloids came about. And this is called poisoning the spindle. There's a way with which these Vinca alkaloids work. We know stacking of tubulin molecules is required to form the mitotic spindle. Vinca alkaloids bind to the tubulin, causing a disruption of the spindle. Naturally, the chromosomes will fail to move apart, which cause a metaphase arrest, and cell death of rapidly proliferating cancer cells causes a reduction in the number of cancer cells. That's how Vinca alkaloids work. So two varieties of Vinca alkaloids are there. Vinblastin, which Polyp's laboratory developed, which is used to treat Hodgkin lymphoma, advanced testicular and breast cancer. whereas vincristin, which was developed by Lilly and company, used to treat acute leukemia and other lymphomas. So Charles Beer, he was a biochemist who joined the same laboratory in 1954, and he was an expert in chromatography. He isolated the active compound vinblastine from the extract in 1958. And at the same time, there was a difficulty in getting supply of periwinkle leaves, where a doctor, a black doctor in Jamaica, who was again an alumnus of University of Toronto, he was in touch with Robert Noble, who supplied the periwinkle leaves. He sent a lot of Boy Scouts into the forest and collected the periwinkle leaves and sent a lot of periwinkle leaves to Polyp's laboratory. At the same time, Eli Lilly, they were also working on hundreds of herbs, and they had parallelly isolated vincristin. So at a symposium in 1958, New York Academy of Sciences Cancer Symposium, Noble presented their finding. The day's last presentation was by Noble. As it was past midnight, all the attendees went to have dinner. Only Lilly researchers remained in the audience, because Lilly knew that Polyp's lab will be producing a paper which is worth listening to. So only the Lilly researchers remained in the audience, and they listened to Noble's presentation, and they realized that Noble's team was also parallelly doing research in Vinca alkalides, and they have identified another compound from the Vinca group. So that is how Lilly entered into an agreement with Noble's group, Polyp's group. And we must remember here that 15 tons of periwinkle leaves are required to produce an ounce of vinblastine. So that amount of extraction need to be done. Here you can see one of the Lilly employees standing on the 15 tons of periwinkle leaf sacks with an ounce glass in his hand. So this is how the timeline of the Vinca alkaloid research that progressed, where Polyp's lab was taking part, an important step there. And Polyp, one of the giant of endocrinology, one of the great giants, he was instrumental in isolating parathyroid hormone. He developed a method for measurement of serum calcium. We need to remember here, this is after the purification of insulin and after his landmark bioassaying of insulin. So then he was instrumental in developing oral estrogen, human chorionic gonadotrophin, and his team was in developing TSH, ACTH, a landmark publication again, Vinca alkalides, synthetic steroids, and a lot of work on atherosclerosis. All research came from his laboratory, almost 200 papers. This is the photograph of the researchers, except Mcleod. You can see Polyp on the left, Best in the middle, along with the lady, wife of Starr, who was presenting this medal in Canadian Medical Association meeting in 1936 to all the three. Insulin Discovery, and after many years discovery, while Polyp and Banting became best of best friends, Best became an enemy of Banting later on, which we'll cover later in this presentation. So Polyp became very famous. He acted as the vice president of the International Congress of Biochemistry, which was held in Cambridge, England. You can see Polyp walking down the ship's aisle with his wife. And in 1957, in honor of his 65th birthday, the Canadian Journal of Biochemistry and Physiology published a special edition where all the papers were from his students. So it is called J.B. Polyp Special Issue. So by the time this issue came into print on his 65th birthday, many of his students were top researchers, and their publications were listed in this publication. And here you can see the commemoration of parathyroid hormone isolation, where in the Department of Biochemistry at the University of Alberta, they opened a plaque. You can see Polyp and his wife standing there when the block got inaugurated. And here from the 20th annual meeting of ADA, which was held in Miami Beach, Florida, in 1960. So he received so many laurels in his life. And here, after his death, you can see his widow watching the plaque, which was inaugurated in the building, Faculty of Medicine building. He retired as the Dean of Faculty of Medicine in this medical college, where the plaque read, "To this great Canadian, in recognition of outstanding service to medical sciences and the welfare of mankind, the research laboratories of this building are affectionately dedicated." This is the lawn where people can sit.
You are not audible.
To the person is the four. I was and close friends in the middle, top middle, is Fred Hipwell. Dr. Fred Hipwell.
Please call him and tell him that he has to continue from the Polyp. Sit out.
Am I audible now? Am I audible, ma'am?
Right now you are audible.
Now we are audible, sir. Yeah.
From the Polyp, sit out. That part we didn't hear, sir. Now you are audible,
okay.
sir.
Now you are audible, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Right, sorry. I think you have to share the screen again, ma'am.
Oh, pedta.
Yeah. One moment, ma'am. Yeah. I hope I am audible now.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's not moving. Yeah. Now we will move on to the third person in the quartet, Dr. Banting. This is the Banting's farmhouse, and he was the youngest of the 5 siblings. Here you can see in this photograph, he's photographed with Dr. Fred Hipwell, who's standing in the middle, top row. Dr. Fred Hipwell finished medicine along with Banting, and he practiced diabetes along with Dr. Banting. So maybe in the future presentations, we'll be seeing more about Dr. Fred Hipwell, who was a very close friend of Dr. Banting. And when Dr. Banting and Best were there in the University of Toronto, the First World War erupted. So University of Toronto was a recruiting center for cadets for the war. So obviously there were a lot of posters in the college street, in the university, even the university magazine, there were calls for students to join the war as cadets. And you can see in front of the university building, there is a training parade going on. You can see a lot of cadets standing there. All of them are students. And again, you can see University of Toronto supplied a lot of cadets for the Canadian Army, and the medical college supplied Army Medical Corps. So where they enrolled doctors to work as frontline medical doctors in the war front. Initially, Dr. Banting applied for a position. Because he was wearing a glass, he was rejected first, and then he got selected second time. And he was a war hero. He had a wound in his arm. Then his arm was saved when he was moved to London, and he was there in the hospital for about 4 to 6 weeks, nursing his wound. Then he returned back to Toronto, where Edith Roach was teaching in a school in London, in Ontario. His lady love. Actually, he was loving her for about 10 years. So he started his practice in London, Ontario, because she was there in a school teaching English. So later on, they broke up after insulin's discovery, because we covered discovery of insulin during the last presentation. After insulin got discovered, Banting's only notable work was this paper, so which got published in 1923. Except this paper, he did not do anything worthwhile about insulin. And so at some point, he became dejected with insulin. Then he said, on 31st October 1923 in London, 3 years ago, I became engaged. 2 years ago, last May, I was wed. And today, I apply for a divorce from insulin. So after treating so many patients for a few years, he just resigned from doing insulin research and moved over to cancer research. And in the meantime, he went to Boston many times to meet Dr. Jocelyn, Elliot P. Jocelyn, where he met Dr. Priscilla White, Jocelyn's assistant. There was a brief affair between them, which Jocelyn finally discouraged. So Banting never had a good family life. And then soon after his return from Boston, in May 1924, he met Marianne Robertson, an X-ray technician in University of Toronto Hospital. And within a few months, he married her. In fact, within a month, he met her in May and married her in June 1924, which was a mistake. So the press covered their wedding because he was already a famous man. And in 1927, he was voted the greatest living Canadian of the times. So he was even given precedence over William Osler. William Osler was one of the greatest physicians Canada had produced, but Banting was rated even better than him. So during this married life, they had one son, William Bill Robinson, who was born in 1929. But even the arrival of the child did not bring happiness into their life because they were poles apart. And Banting was very busy. Banting Research Institute, which was inaugurated in 1930, and he was very busy with this institute work, where Sadie Gaines joined him as an assistant. Again, Sadie Gaines loved Banting, but Banting never reciprocated that love. So throughout her association with Banting, she was very loyal to him, worked like mad, but Banting appreciated her work, but never developed any personal interest in her. The only worthwhile discovery from Banting Institute was this suit, Frank's flying suit. Here you can see Wilbur Franks, who was a developer of this suit, which was later modeled to create the space suits, which you would have seen all the astronauts wearing. So this was a prelude to that. So this suit was developed by Wilbur Franks in Banting's Research Institute. So this was the only worthwhile discovery by this institute after insulin. And Marion, his wife, was a socializer. So she conducted a lot of parties, and which Banting disliked. Banting was a farm boy. Actually, he was a shy person. He never socialized, and he did not like the way things were moving in the home front. Around this time, Marion had developed a relationship with an author called Lee Bodice. So he was a famous author. And at the same time, Banting developed some liking towards this author, Blodwin Davies. So both had their own interests around that time. At some point, they fell apart and they had a very stormy divorce. So unfortunately, their son, you can see 11-year-old son, at 11 years of age, he lost his father. And at 15 years, Marion also died because of cancer. So he became an orphan. Most of the times when they were divorced, the custody was with Marion. The child used to visit Banting during the weekends, but Banting was by the time an alcoholic, a chain smoker, and he had post-traumatic stress disorder. So he couldn't handle the child properly. And many times Bill would write letters to his father rather than talking to him. So you can see one letters written by the kid to the father. So this is a turbulent life of a celebrity's child. And later, after becoming an orphan, at 15 years, he joined a boarding school where he completed his course. And he became a famous documentarian. Actually, he became a director of documentary films. And one of his films was voted one of the best documentary films in Canada. But he never used his father's name to become famous. He died in 1998. And while Banting, during his later life, found a lot of solace in moving to Quebec. He had a lot of trips to Quebec where he developed friendship with this famous painter, Jackson, one of the famous painters of the century. He was one among the top 7. It's called Group of 7 in Canada. So Jackson developed a liking towards Banting, and Banting and Jackson went to Quebec and drew a lot of paintings. Banting was very much attached to the Eskimos. He felt that the Eskimos' life was being eroded by even westernization. He was just worried about their livelihood getting lost because of the oil exploration companies which were proliferating around their habitat in Quebec. So he was very much attached to Eskimos. And these are some of the paintings. And he became quite famous. He was invited to inaugurate one of the world's largest exhibition around that time. So he inaugurated that exhibition. He had the honor. He got a lot of peace by moving to Quebec, doing fishing. This is a photograph taken in 1938 where you can see him fishing, sitting in a small boat. And in 1938, he married Henrietta Ball, who was one of his research associates. Banting Institute was conducting research courses. She did MA research there, completed her MA research in the Banting Institute, and then later Banting married her. This is one of the very successful marriages. Unfortunately, it did not last long. In 1938, end of 1938, he married her. In 1941, he died due to a plane crash. So they had only 2 years of life, but they lived their life fully around that time. After Banting's death in 1941, Lady Banting, she's called Lady Banting, Henrietta completed medicine in University of Toronto in 1945. She joined the Royal Canadian Army Medical Corps and served the army. Then she became a very good researcher in cancer, and she joined a women's hospital where she did a landmark study using mammography as a diagnostic tool for the early detection of breast cancer. She was one of the pioneers in using mammography as a detective tool for breast cancer. So on top, you can see the first publication, which happened in 1967. So this is considered as one of the landmark papers. So she is also called the other Dr. Banting because she is also a medical doctor. So other Dr. Banting. So she joined this Women's College Hospital, which got established in 1911, which had a very unique place in history as it was founded and staffed entirely by women in Canada. Dr. Banting was the director of the cancer detection clinic till her retirement in 1971. Unfortunately, she also developed cancer and died in 1976. Henrietta Banting Breast Cancer Center is a center of excellence today. And Banting did not do much research, but he traveled a lot. Here you can see him meeting Dr. Pavlov, an Nobel laureate, while attending the 15th International Physiological Congress, Leningrad. So Pavlov's home was in Leningrad, so Banting met him there. And finally, Banting chose to again join the army when the Second World War erupted. And naturally, he had to go on a secret mission. And this bomber developed some engine snag while flying. The pilot returned back to Canada, but even though he reached the shore, unfortunately, the plane crash landed and Banting died because he was not wearing the safety belt. So a lot of fame came after his death. So USA named this ship as SS Frederick Banting. So it set sail in 1943, and even a crater on the moon was named as Banting, which happened in 1973. Banting, a stellar individual, this crater was named aptly as Banting crater. Then Queen Elizabeth visited Canada to do honor for him. So she visited Banting home, where she lit this flame of hope. This flame of hope is still burning. Whenever a scientist or a team of scientists finds a cure for diabetes, they will be invited to this Banting, where they will be allowed to close this flame forever. And Banting had many faces. He was very childish, he was very enthusiastic, and he was a determined person. He had native shrewdness, he was honest, he had intense determination, he was an altruist, he was a self-educated painter, but for all his strengths, he had weaknesses also. Like he was having problems of being a hero. He was addicted to alcohol and smoke. He had inability to change his opinions, and he was very hostile to press. So his later years were very unhappy because of the memory of the achievement, because of the challenges to repeat it. The press always expected him to come out with some cure for cancer, and his failure to meet those great expectations. So a lot of books, documentaries happened after Banting because of all this. Then finally, to finish this presentation, we'll move on to the fourth person, Charles Best. He got engaged to Margaret Hooper in 1920. He completed his BA Physiology and Biochemistry at the University of Toronto in 1921 when he joined Banting as his student assistant. In the summer vacation before enrolling into MA course, he was offered the opportunity to work with Banting by Mcleod. So this we have seen actually in the last presentation. He had a lot of credit to his CV, like from between 1922 to 1923, he completed his MA, he enrolled into his medical school, he became research associate of Banting and Best Chair of Medical Research. He became the director of Insulin Division of Connaught Laboratories, and he became the liaison officer for Eli Lilly and Company. He was a student cadet when he joined Banting. If you remember in the last presentation, I mentioned that he joined the army for a training for 10 days. He left Banting. In those 11 months of continuous work, only those 10 days Best missed because he had to report to the army. And then later again, when the Second World War erupted, he joined the army as a senior level officer in 1943. The Banting and Best, they were very close when the experiments were happening. Later, they fell apart. In 1922, Sir Henry Dale, a very distinguished physiology professor from UK, visited Toronto to investigate insulin. So Dale met Best, and he advised Best to get out of Toronto for his graduate work. So what Best did was to move to UK with his wife. He stayed there for about a few years and did his doctorate under Dale in England, and Dale became his lifelong mentor. Dale was very famous by this publication. He was the one who researched on the action of neurotransmitter acetylcholine, for which he was awarded Nobel Prize many years later. So Best finished his medicine, his DSc as well as PhD, and he worked under Dale in 1928, and also he trained in the lab of Sir William Bayliss, the very famous endocrinologist of his times. He became the chair of physiology at a very young age, 27 years, and Charles Best made significant contributions related to heparin, choline as a dietary factor, and the discovery of histaminase. So if the transplant surgeries progressed to that level around the time, it was because of Best's research on heparin. So his contribution to the development of heparin was immense. And with Norman Taylor, he wrote this famous book, The Physiological Basis of Medical Practice, in 1937, a very famous book which was used to be the Bible for all the postgraduate physiology students throughout the world. And Banting's generosity towards Best stopped after sharing the Nobel Prize. It was not sustained for long. For insulin's 10th anniversary, which happened in 1931, Best was not invited. So around that time itself, Banting had started having a disliking towards Best. Best and his friends, which included Dale, his mentor, they pushed ahead with retelling of the discovery. As Best became very popular in physiology, he became the HOD, started publishing a lot of papers in physiology. His way of telling the story became very different. He just relegated Banting's contribution as an orthopedic surgeon's duct ligation, and he promoted himself as the one who gave a lot of ideas. For example, I told Banting to use alcohol while doing the extract, which in fact was wrong. Only Mcleod was suggested to use alcohol, which was later perfected by Polyp. So in 1946, Best used the 25th anniversary of insulin discovery to trump up his own contribution in the ADA conference. So he was just talking about his contribution the way higher than the other three. So that's where he heard. He was the professor of physiology in University of Toronto between 1929 to 1965. And Banting and Best had a lot of tussles. Best strenuously lobbied to be the next Canadian medical chief for a liaison mission towards wartime Britain. He wanted to go as the chief medical officer to Britain, representing Canada. Few days prior to the actual trip, he suddenly announced that he could not make the trip. One version says that his father developed heart attack, so that's why Best decided not to go. But Banting told his friends that Best backed out because of the difficulties in traveling in a bomber, because this bomber was new and very difficult winter conditions. So the trip was going to be hazardous. Banting suspected that Best just excused himself because of the dangers involved. So Banting decided to go himself, knew that it would be a very hazardous crossing. While confirming his flight, he said, if they ever give that share of mine to that, yes, dash, Best, I will roll over in my grave. When Banting died due to the plane crash, both his control of his department was friends. Banting was also working on a proposal for the University of Toronto to recognize his former rival, but now a close friend, Polyp, with a honorary degree, which was also stalled by Best. So Best put his foot down, and University of Toronto never did this honor on Polyp's favor. So whereas Sir Henry Dale, he nominated Best for Nobel Prize thrice, but in vain. You can see the Nobel Prize nominations here. So by Sir Henry Dale throughout his career, you must remember that to get a Nobel Prize, you need to be nominated by a previous Nobel Prize winner. So unless a Nobel Prize winner nominates you, your work will not be considered. So naturally, Sir Henry Dale, being a Nobel Prize winner, nominated Best. You can see on the last three rows, physiology or medicine, 1950, 1951, and 1953. Thrice he nominated Charles Best, but in vain. The Nobel Committee did not accord this honor to Best for his life. Best was deeply interested to create a research institute bearing his name. Like Banting Institute, he wanted a best institute. So naturally, with his power and lobbying, he made University of Toronto to build one institute. And this best institute was opened in 1953 with Dale as the chief guest. And when Dale delivered his address, actually Best gave him a lot of tips about the insulin discovery, how he has to describe everything was discussed prior to his address. So Dale in his address gave everything to Best and never even mentioned about Polyp, who was one of the invited guests in that gathering. So Polyp was really annoyed with this address by Dale, realizing that how Best was just trying to corner all the glory, even after so many decades of insulin discovery. So here you can see Best standing in front of the Best Institute block. And here you can see William, Best, along with Lady Banting, with a bust, bronze bust of Banting and Best. This photograph was taken in 1962. Lady Banting was gracious enough to grace all the occasions whenever Best invited her to the physiology department or University of Toronto till she lived. And here you can see Best looking at his own bust along with his wife. And again, when 50th anniversary of insulin was celebrated in 1971, Lady Banting, Henrietta Banting, visited Best's laboratory and honored him. So Best had to leave the department because of ill health, and he died in 1978. So this is a final slide. Insulin discovery, you can consider this as a 4 into 100 meters relay. Probably you can consider a Olympic relay. You can equate this to an Olympic relay where 4 sprinters will be running in the 4 into 100 meters relay. Banting was the first one to start. To start the relay, you need to react fast to the gun and you have to clear the block fast. So Banting had the dream. He had the dream and he tried to live the dream and he reacted to it and cleared the block. Whereas Best joined Banting because obviously Banting had a lot of trouble with his alcohol addiction, with his problems with Mcleod and with his personal family problems. So naturally, he was a devastated man in his family setting. So Best provided all the momentum to Banting. He supported him nicely throughout the 11 months of experiment. He never left Banting, helped him a lot. And then Mcleod returned from his vacation. Then he took control of the experiment. He allotted more people into the experiment. He invited Polyp and directed the experiment in such a way that it reached the logical conclusion. So he got the control, and finally Polyp finished the race with his purification. This is how all the 4 people deserved the glory. It's not about the individual who contributed better, but it all started with Banting. Without Banting, it could not have started, but the other 3 also contributed immensely. So there was no reason for them to fight among themselves. They fought without realizing that the future is going to honor all of them in an equal way without any prejudice. Thank you for your patient listening.
Sir, it was a wonderful explanation. Sir, it was a wonderful expansive discussion on the travels and achievement of the life of Quartet, Banting, Best, Mcleod, and William Dale. The genius of Banting, his travels with his love interests and addictions, his varied interests, and his falling apart from his friends, his contributions as Surgeon General in the Army, his brilliance and management of Mcleod, and the Best, the way he contributed to the physiology, all has made us really get an insight into the great personalities of the quartet, sir. Thank you so much for the interesting deal, sir.
Extraordinary.
Thank you,
Dr.
ma'am.
Nalla
Extraordinary.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Nalla
Yes, sir.
yeah, wonderful presentation. Only a small basic doubt.
Yes,
Like
sir.
everybody has, in any Indian hand or any Indian contribution on insulin discovery, at least 1%.
So actually, there was no Indian contribution, but in the previous presentation, I mentioned once when Banting was without any job before he could get into the insulin experiment. He tried to join the Indian British Army. So if that idea fructified, he would have reached India and worked in India as a British Army medical surgeon.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Simpler.
So how did you find how did you embark on this topic? And your penchant for clarity, penchant for details is amazing, sir. How did you land on this project, sir?
Honestly, there was a historian called Michael Bliss. He was the HOD of history, Department of History in University of Toronto. So since he was the university professor, he developed some interest in digging into what happened around the time of insulin discovery, because there were so many stories going around, each one's version. In fact, all three of them had their own version written and presented to the university vice chancellor around that time. So claiming priority in that research. So since this professor, Michael Bliss, had access to all the documents which are available in the University of Toronto, he started this research. And he met Lady Banting and got a lot of personal materials from Lady Banting. And then he met all the survivors of those times, interviewed them, and wrote authentic books. So I read those books, and that's how I developed interest in this topic. And I thought, apart from talking about these four people, because there are others who have contributed. For example, Elliot V. Jocelyn, Alan, these two are doyens in diabetes. So in future webinars, we are going to talk about them. And there are famous diabetic patients, some of them who won Nobel Prizes also, who survived and became Nobel laureates, women who achieved. There are so many interesting topics in the subsequent webinars are to come. So this is not about science, it is about celebrating their lives. So science is always, as somebody said, there are many people to talk about how to treat diabetes, but we need to remember that we are standing on the shoulders of these giants, and they had their personal troubles. On top of their personal troubles, they achieved so much. If youngsters could listen and could develop some motivation from these presentations, my job.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's a wonderful presentation, sir. Thanks to you.
Thank you, ma'am.
As usual. Wonderful presentation, sir.
Being history, I don't think there need not be any question and answer session. History means it happened.
The story is a story which makes it interesting, sir.
Interesting, yes.
More than the
Yeah, you took it forward also is very, very
beautiful
good.
story.
It took a lot of time for me to get that Banting's son's photograph and about Lady Banting. There were only passing mention, but she was the pioneer in mammography. So I was really astonished. So a lot of dots are getting connected.
Yes, sir.
Wonderful work, sir. Thank you so much.